Imagine a world where the familiar sounds of life, church bells marking every moment, suddenly cease. The gentle chime that once echoed through narrow streets, calling people to gather, to pray, to celebrate, or to mourn, is gone. The air, once filled with the rhythm of daily rituals, now hangs heavy with an unnatural stillness. In the mid-14th century, these bells were the heartbeat of every town, ringing for prayer, celebration, and mourning. They marked the passage of time, the changing of seasons, and the milestones of life. For generations their sound was a comfort, a reminder that the community was alive and connected. But as the Black Death swept across Europe, the bells fell silent. There were simply too many dead, and too few left to mourn them. The familiar rituals that had shaped daily existence were abruptly interrupted, replaced by fear and uncertainty. The silence was more terrifying than any sound, a chilling sign that death had overwhelmed the living. It was a silence that crept into every home, every street, and every heart, a constant reminder of loss and the fragility of life. People lost not just loved ones, but the rituals that gave life meaning and structure. Weddings, baptisms, and funerals, moments that once brought people together, were abandoned or performed in haste, if at all. The community's sense of identity and belonging began to unravel. The absence of bells was a stark symbol. The world as they knew it was unraveling. Time itself seemed to stop, as if the very fabric of society had been torn apart. The Black Death wiped out up to 60% of Europe's population in just a few years. Entire families vanished overnight and whole communities disappeared from the map, leaving behind only memories and ruins. Entire villages vanished, leaving only empty homes and overgrown fields. Nature began to reclaim what had once been bustling centers of life, as if erasing the traces of those who had lived there. This was not a distant war, but an intimate apocalypse, an invisible enemy in every breath and touch. Fear and isolation became the new normal, as neighbors avoided one another and families barricaded themselves inside. The silence of the bells is more than a statistic, it's the human experience of catastrophe. It is the echo of grief, the weight of absence, and the loss of hope that once rang out with every chime. Before we explore the science and history, sit with that silence. It's where we begin to grasp the true impact of the plague. In that quiet, we can sense the fear, the confusion, and the longing for normalcy that defined an entire generation. A world turned upside down, where even the most sacred rites were abandoned out of necessity. In this silence we find the starting point for understanding not just the devastation, but the resilience that would eventually emerge from the darkness. The Black Death was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, sweeping across Europe, Asia, and North Africa in the mid-14th century. It struck with terrifying speed, leaving entire towns and villages deserted almost overnight. The disease was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, a microscopic killer invisible to the people of the time. This deadly bacterium thrived in fleas that infested black rats, which were everywhere, on ships and homes and among the cargo that traveled the trade routes of the medieval world. When fleas bit infected rats and then humans, they unknowingly became the perfect vehicle for spreading the plague, carrying the bacteria from animal to person and from person to person. Bubonic plague caused excruciatingly painful swollen lymph nodes called buboes, along with high fever, chills, and exhaustion. For many, death came within just a few days of the first symptoms. Sometimes the infection spread deeper, into the blood, causing septicemic plague, or into the lungs, resulting in pneumonic plague. These forms were even more deadly, and pneumonic plague could be transmitted directly from person to person through the air. Medieval people had no idea what caused this mysterious illness. They looked to the heavens and blamed the alignment of the stars and planets, or believed that poisonous air, known as miasma, or even the wrath of an angry god was to blame for the suffering. Without scientific understanding, people turned to prayer, hoping for divine intervention to save them from the plague. Superstition and fear ruled daily life. People clung to charms, rituals, and desperate remedies, searching for any hope of protection. The disease was an invisible, incomprehensible enemy, lurking in the shadows and striking without warning. The terror people felt was not just from the gruesome symptoms, but from the overwhelming sense of mystery and helplessness that surrounded the plague. The Black Death was more than a disease. It shattered families, communities, and the very foundations of medieval society, leaving a legacy of fear and uncertainty. In the end, the Black Death would change Europe forever, reshaping its history, its people, and the world as they knew it. The Black Death began in the vast, windswept plains of Central Asia, a region crisscrossed by ancient trade routes and bustling with the movement of people, animals, and goods. From here, the deadly disease traveled westward along the legendary Silk Road, carried unknowingly by traders, merchants, and their animals, as they journeyed between continents. By 1346, the plague had reached the bustling ports of the Black Sea, where Mongol armies besieged the city of Kaffa. In a desperate act of biological warfare, they allegedly catapulted plague-infected corpses over the city walls, spreading terror and disease among the defenders. Fleeing merchants and sailors desperate to escape the horrors of Kaffa boarded ships bound for Europe. In 1347, 12 ships arrived in the Sicilian port of Messina, their holds filled with the dead and dying, bringing the plague to European shores for the first time. Despite frantic efforts by local officials to turn the ships away and close the harbor gates, it was already too late. The invisible enemy had landed. The disease spread rapidly through Sicily, carried not just by people, but by rats and the fleas that infested them, thriving in the crowded, unsanitary conditions of medieval towns and villages. Europe's intricate network of trade routes became highways for the plague, allowing it to move swiftly from port to port, town to town, reaching France, Spain, England, and far beyond within mere months. The disease moved with terrifying speed, sweeping through crowded cities and even reaching the most remote villages, leaving devastation in its wake wherever it appeared. No place was safe. The very interconnectedness that had once brought prosperity and culture now became the means by which death traveled, touching every corner of society. By 1351, the Black Death had reached the farthest corners of Europe from the Mediterranean to the northernmost villages, sparing no region. It seemed to leap across great distances, striking with equal ferocity in bustling cities and isolated hamlets, as if no barrier could slow its advance. Every ship that docked, every traveler who entered a city, every caravan that rolled into town could unknowingly carry the seeds of the plague. The world felt suddenly small, its people trapped and powerless, as fear and uncertainty spread alongside the disease. The Black Death was unstoppable, riding the very currents of civilization, transforming the world in ways no one could have foreseen. As the plague took hold, daily life collapsed into chaos and fear, markets emptied, food grew scarce, and social bonds unraveled. Neighbors became threats, every cough was a warning, families were torn apart, parents lost children, and some, in terror, abandoned their own kin. The dead overwhelmed cemeteries, forcing mass graves and nightly corpse carts. The dignity of burial was lost, death became anonymous and relentless, despair and panic ruled. Some turned to wild revelry, others to desperate piety. Flagellants whipped themselves in public, hoping to appease God. The air was thick with dread, and hope was scarce. Life swung between terror, denial, and frantic faith. The plague stripped away normalcy, leaving only survival. It was a world transformed by fear and loss. With no understanding of germs, people tried everything to ward off the plague. Doctors in beaked masks prescribed bloodletting, lancing buboes, and bizarre potions, none of which worked. Folk remedies flourished, burning aromatic woods, carrying posies, and fleeing to the countryside. Religious processions and self-flagellation became common, as people begged for divine mercy. Some cities like Ragusa pioneered quarantine, isolating ships for 40 days, giving us the word quarantine. Most efforts failed, but isolation was a rare success, hinting at future public health measures. In a world of fear, even desperate measures offered a glimmer of hope. The Black Death shattered Europe's social order. The feudal system, with peasants bound to the land, collapsed as labor became scarce and valuable. Survivors demanded higher wages and better conditions. Many left their lords for better opportunities. Laws tried to freeze wages and restrict movement, but they failed. Peasants had tasted freedom. Tensions erupted in revolts like the Jacquerie in France and the Peasants' Revolt in England. The church, powerless to stop the plague, lost authority as prayers went unanswered and clergy died in droves. Disillusionment grew, sowing seeds for future religious upheaval. The old social contract was broken. The plague didn't just kill people, it upended the foundations of society. Power shifted, and Europe would never be the same. The trauma of the Black Death echoed in every institution. A new world was beginning to emerge from the ruins. In the aftermath, Europe was transformed. The collapse of feudalism led to a wage-based economy and new social mobility. Land use shifted, fields became pastures, fueling the textile industry. Survivors inherited wealth, boosting trade, art, and learning. This new prosperity helped spark the Renaissance. The trauma of the plague fostered a more secular, humanistic worldview and a hunger for scientific understanding. Universities and technology advanced, with inventions like the printing press flourishing in a changed society. The Black Death cleared the way for a more dynamic, modern Europe. Out of devastation came innovation and cultural rebirth. The world that emerged was forever altered. The Black Death's first wave ended, but the plague lingered for centuries. Outbreaks recurred every decade or two, shaping life and policy across Europe. Over time, some genetic resistance developed and public health measures improved. Quarantine became standard and cities created health boards to contain outbreaks. The black rat was gradually replaced by the brown rat, disrupting the plague's transmission. The last major epidemic in Western Europe was the Great Plague of Marseille in 1720, contained by strict quarantine. After that, the plague faded from Europe, though it persisted elsewhere. The fear finally began to lift, not because the disease was cured, but because society learned to manage it. The long shadow of the Black Death slowly receded. Europe emerged, scarred but wiser from centuries of struggle. The Black Death left a mark on Western civilization that endures to this day. Its echoes are found in nursery rhymes, art, and the theme of memento mori. Remember, you must die. The plague's trauma shaped culture, language, and even our DNA. It's a lesson in humanity's vulnerability, the dangers of misinformation, and the power of resilience. Studying the Black Death reveals patterns that repeat in every crisis: fear, scapegoating, innovation, and adaptation. Out of tragedy came transformation. The silence bells of 1348 still remind us, understanding the past helps us face the future. For more stories that shaped our world, subscribe and join us on this journey through history.